I think that's everything. Addison, why don't I turn it over to you for an informal bio? And once you're done with that, we'll open the floor to questions.
All right, sounds good. So hi everyone, I'm Addison. Bear with me. This is my first time kind of doing one of these like mentorship sessions or anything. So if I stumble, forgive me. Anyway, so my background is I started my career as I went to a no-name tech school for software programming. I actually was originally going to become a game developer, and I never ended up going into that field. I graduated from that school with a game design development focus, but I eventually started at what would now be called probably a startup, but startups weren't really a thing back then. So it was in the dealing with the fenestration industry. So it's like windows and doors, and there was a software role in that company. And I was there for about 2 years, and then I actually decided to pursue a different career interest of mine, which was chemistry. So I actually went to a different no-name school. So this time in Minnesota, the first one was in Florida. And I started pursuing a degree in organic chemistry, and I was going to get my PhD and become a professor there. In my pursuit of that, I eventually moved to California because my intention was going to go to UC Davis for my PhD. But then one day, when I was coming home from work, I was working at Target at the time. I get a cold call from a headhunter, and originally I got a ton of those calls, so I just kind of hung up on them. I don't even think I answered it. But then on their message, they said, "Hey, we have a position at Intel," and I'm like, Intel, like the Intel. This isn't like a scam or anything like that. So I did call back and like, so this is like the Intel, like Intel Corporation, they make processors, right? And she's like, yeah, that's what it is. So I did take that position and met with. It was a super informal process because like I said, I didn't apply. They just kind of randomly called me, and met with my then manager at the time, and my interview was interesting because I was very clear with them. I'm like, I haven't programmed in like 5 years. I've been doing this chemistry thing. So are you sure you want to take this risk? And eventually they did. We worked through it all, and I started at Intel. Um, and at the time, I was the only developer on the team. So I was a solo computer programmer on a team of mechanical thermal engineers. From there, the team started to grow a little bit because I released some software that I was pretty much the only support for. So we started to grow the team, hired on some new people, and that eventually led to me becoming like the tech lead for that group. Couple org changes and some role swaps here and there, but after that, at this time, I was still the head of the team. And then after many years of doing that, I eventually was offered a position as a software engineering manager. My then manager had saw potential. He's like, hey, I know you've been kind of interested in this, and I think you've done a great job as a tech lead. Is people management something you'd want to do? So I decided to say yes, take a risk on that, and became a people manager. And I've been doing that for about 3 years now. It'll be going about two and a half, 3 years. And then my, as far as my whole tenure at Intel, in November, it'll be my 10th year at Intel. So this is my decade there. By far my longest place that I've ever stayed at as a career. Cause like I was in that other software company for like 2 years, worked at Target for like 2 years, other menial jobs, but this has definitely been my career, if you want to think of it that way. So that's been kind of my journey. As far as what I do at Intel now, so I work in the data center group. So I don't work on client computing, and that's where most people are familiar with. When you go buy a laptop, that's the client computing group. But I work in data centers, so we support the mega data centers you see around. Facebook, Google, those are kind of the big customers. And our software is particularly focused on quality systems. So we create tools internally that help enable engineers to get their jobs done with as high quality as possible. And if you've seen Intel in the news, anytime in the past year, the news has not been very favorable to us. And one of the issues has been our quality systems, which is one of the things, kind of forming a new team around it. And we're trying to drive that corporate change to help get leadership and kind of establish our reputation, since we did lose it a little bit there. So every day is a challenge. It's always a lot of fun. I love my team. So I have a small team. I actually just had a new employee start earlier on Monday, but I've got 6 people that work directly under me. It's fluctuated. I've ranged between like 5 and 10, but we had tech layoffs earlier this year, which we can talk about. So a relatively small team. And the interesting thing about my team is everybody except for the person who just started on Monday is located in Mexico. And due to all the travel restrictions, I actually haven't been able to go see them in person since like 2019, I think it would have been. So it's been many years since I've gotten to meet them in person. So managing remotely is a whole set of its own challenges. And, there's a culture and language thing you have to work through as well. But yeah, that's kind of the 5-minute, my kind of 5-minute history. So hopefully that was clear, but happy to expand on anything.
Great. Thanks so much, Addison. So folks who are filtering in now, we'll use the chat box for questions. So as questions come up, please just put them there and I will facilitate them for Addison. Again, you are also welcome to just unmute and ask a question if you'd like. So while people are getting questions going, I know Addison, you and I had talked about like a couple of topics that you could speak to. I think one that's on everybody's mind right now is how the tech industry has changed and is changing. Obviously AI is a huge thing on people's mind, as well as various other topics. So I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about what you're seeing, from where you're sitting at Intel or just like general trends you're seeing in the market. I'm sure that plenty of people would be curious about your answer.
Yeah. So I would say the biggest change is that, if you've seen the news, is the tech industry has been getting pretty hammered over the past couple of years. And the way I look at it is kind of the party's over, right? There used to be times where you would come into any tech company, get paid an exorbitant amount of money, and not even have to do your job very effectively. That's changing quite a bit now, especially with all the layoffs. We've lost really good people over that time, but when I say the party is over, I mean, you do need to come in and deliver results and do your best work and, prove that you deserve to be there. One of the things with the tech industry that's changed is it's much more of a risk versus reward thing. Whereas I have a lot of friends and colleagues who don't work for tech companies. They work for, let's say, a tech company or they're the tech person at like a local police station, right? They're never going to get laid off or anything like that because they're the only person, but their salary and benefits might not be as high as. Whereas the tech industry, it goes through these wild swings where if you're not doing results that matter to the company, you're going to be at risk. You'll get paid a lot for it, but again, it is still a risk. So that's the number one thing that I've seen has changed, is that you do need to come in with an effective game plan. What are you going to deliver? What can you offer the company that doesn't make you just overhead? As far as AI, so AI is a big challenge. I hear it every day here. It's part of every conversation pretty much. The biggest thing to realize with AI right now is AI is a tool, and it's how you use the tool. It's just like any of your IDEs or anything else. I actually just attended a conference not too long ago about AI, and some of the things that you can apply AI to, you might not even think about. So for instance, have you ever thought about using AI to help comment your code? Or have ever used it for just simple one-off tasks rather than, hey, write me an entire game or whatever it is? So how you use that tool is really what's going to help make you more efficient in the workplace. So one of my favorite examples from that is like regular expressions, right? Regexes. If you're not familiar with those, they're very tricky to do on your own. But for an AI, they're not very challenging at all. So you can go into an AI tool and say, hey, write me a regex for this. I want to parse out phone numbers or something like that. So it's all about how you use the tools that are at your disposal, and it can really make you a more proficient programmer. But the catch is you don't want to use it as a crutch, right? It still doesn't replace a human programmer. There's so many skills that you have and problem solving things that you need to apply. So don't use it as a crutch. If you're going into an interview and you're taking a programming test and you just spit out what an AI told you the answer was, even if you land the job, are you going to be successful? Because I'm not looking for somebody who can just type in Google or type into an AI bot, hey, write me this script. I mean, I can do that, right? But you need to be able to apply it appropriately. Again, it's a tool. Think of it a little bit like the internet, right? When the internet came out, nobody knew how it would be applied. Think of Uber. Uber would not exist without the internet, right? Airbnb, all these, and you 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't even fathomed what is the Uber or Airbnb business look like. It's going to be the same with AI, where 10 years from now, there's going to be some multi-billion-dollar company that comes out that uses AI in a way you never even would have thought of. Maybe you can be the one that thinks of that idea, but again, it's a tool, and just make sure you use it effectively and not as a crutch.
Great answer. I'm old enough to have watched the internet come into being. I remember getting my first email address when I was a college freshman and being like, what am I ever going to use this for? So I really resonate with what you just said, because I could never have seen. And then certainly when the iPhone came out, it changed the game again completely. It's exciting. I know it's scary probably right now to be in the position of a software engineer, but like,
Yeah,
it has to be a little bit exciting as well, because there's going to be possibilities we can't even see. All right, we've got tons of questions rolling in, Addison. So let's start going through those. This is from Raina. When did you know in your career journey that you wanted to swap to a manager position? Did you do anything specific to help yourself for that transition?
great questions. So the first part, when did I know? I actually knew fairly on in my, actually it goes so far back as my original schooling. And the reason I saw it is because we started getting into some very complex algorithms and so on, and we started working on teams. And from that perspective, I would see my team members and I was like, man, these guys are genius. I can't keep up with them at all. However, what I was very good at was helping motivate people and get us all aligned into a central goal. And I was like, hey, maybe I'm not the best programmer in the world, but I do know how to put all the pieces together. And I found that if you have that technical capability and you're a people person, you can really be an effective manager. And one of the pieces of feedback that my previous manager gave me, he's like, it's harder to find at Intel, probably across the industry. I'm not sure, but you want to have somebody that has that technical expertise, because some of my employees will tell me, it's really nice, Addison, that I can come to you with a problem and we can actually work on the problem together and solve it, rather than me just giving you status updates. And an interesting thing is if you look at our current CEO, Pat Gelsinger, he's an engineer and he's not a businessman. And our last couple CEOs have been more business focused, and he's really turning around the company. As far as what you can do to help yourself if you're interested in being a people manager, I would say at least at Intel, and I'm sure there's many opportunities in other companies as well, is I've taken a ton of classes that just come across my email. They take a lot of time. In fact, I've got one tomorrow that's going to keep me in meetings until 8 p.m. But I take as many of them as I can and basically never say no, which is a risk, but it's something fun as well. But the only thing I'll caution you on that is you don't feel like you have to be a people manager to be more successful. I know a lot of my friends even feel that way, but at Intel particularly, there are parallel paths you can take. And if you take a people management path or a project management path or a technical path, they're all equally weighted as far as like how much responsibility and pull they have. So if you're a principal engineer, you have as much pull as like a director. So don't feel like you have to become a people manager in order to be successful. There are Intel senior fellows that are basically the equivalent of a president at the company, right? And they have that much power and pull. So don't force yourself into it. There's always a path upwards, even if you're not interested in working with people.
Great, thank you. This is from Gabriella. What struggles did you have at the beginning of your career after not having coding experience for so long?
Number one thing I suffer from, and I'm sure a lot of people do too, and to this day even, is imposter syndrome, which is the feeling that I'm not good enough for this role. I can't believe that, I'm going to get fired tomorrow because I have no idea what I'm doing. Trust me, none of us know what we're doing, and somehow we make the best processes in the world, right? So one thing is just building that confidence, and the way you can do that is get small wins. Don't always worry about those huge wins that it's like, oh, I just saved the company $1 billion. That would be great, but the small wins really help build up your confidence. The other things with the struggles is, check your ego at the door. Don't worry about, having all the answers. I mean, I certainly don't, but I always joke with my boss that like my seventh team member is Stack Overflow, because without Stack Overflow, I wouldn't have a job. I do a ton of research on stuff in order to help make sure I'm technically capable. And then the last thing that I did is, so I went to school for game design and development. But outside of work, even though I'm a people manager now and I don't do much programming at work, I always kind of keep my skills up to date outside of work. So I've made a couple of games outside of work, and they're in completely different domains, obviously different languages and everything, but just help keeping your brain kind of exercised in that can really make a difference, I think. As long as it's something you enjoy, right? You don't want to burn yourself out, but like just being able to exercise that technical muscle. If you can find like a passion project, I think that helps a lot too.
Next question is from Yaya. How did Intel find you?
That's a fantastic question. I have no idea. I think what happened was so when I was working in California at the time, and I was working at Target, and I was looking for a chemistry job originally because I was gearing up for my PhD. And I remember distinctly, because I recorded it, I had applied for over 100 jobs and I didn't get a call back from a single one. And that's what, I had 2 bachelor's degrees under my belt, and I'm going for these junior positions. I'm like, what's going on here? So I think what had happened is I had my resume published on like Career Builder or something like that. And I just a headhunter found it, and trust me, they will find you, because sometimes people contact me. I'm like, how did you even get this email? Because it's like my personal email. It's not associated with work. And I asked somebody once, and they said we have like other tools we use. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of scary. But yeah, so I think it was Career Builder. Like LinkedIn is bigger now, I think. So just having your resume out there would help a lot.
Next question is from Tisby, if I said that right. What were the biggest changes moving from tech lead to manager?
The biggest changes is I do a lot less technical work now. If I used to split it beforehand, I used to do programming maybe 90% of the time. Now it's programming probably 10% or less of the time. I kind of sneak it in when I can. And the only reason I'm even doing that much technical work is because I usually overcommit my team a little bit, because I know I can pick up any overhead we have. So that's definitely the biggest. If you're like going to be a people manager, you need to be ready to give up that technical part of your job, because I do a lot more of team direction, budgeting stuff, reviews, setting objectives for the quarter, and so on.
Thank you. Next question is from Tomomi. What was your skills that caught Intel's eye? And piggybacking on that, how should we differentiate ourselves from other applicants? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, the thing that they liked, so with my previous job at that startup, I'm calling it, in the fenestration industry, is they specialized in tools for companies. So when you would go order a window or a door from Pella, they would actually use our software, and it was this tool that helped automate and drive that. And what the team was looking for was a tools programmer that could do something similar to that, but internally for the thermal mechanical engineers. So they saw the fit there. And I also think there's probably a little bit of luck. And I would say I would attribute a lot to that tools experience, because I'm a tools programmer. The one thing I will mention about that is, on paper, again, I'm not very impressive at all. I went to 2 no-name schools. My side projects, I didn't invent like a top 10 app or anything like that. But I do have them on there. So I think what really helps differentiate when I'm looking at resumes, I'll tell you right away, because of my personal experience, if you went from Harvard or whatever, I personally don't really care about that. But I personally care about is the passions that you show outside of work. So for instance, for me, I had worked on an app. I completely self-published an app on Google Play, right? And I was like, oh, that's, if I see something like that, I'm like, oh, that's, pretty nice. This person clearly is passionate about programming. And if it's an interesting topic, then that just gives you a little bit bonus points, but you can't really plan for that. So if you made a game, I'd probably raise my eyebrow. But the other differentiation you can make on your resume, in my opinion, is any sort of research projects you've done, even if they didn't get completed, especially in this advent of AI, like if you said, hey, I tried to use AI to create some sort of smart bot that helped me grocery shop, right? Just some random example. Even if you didn't actually execute on it, that's the kind of thing that would be really interesting to see. And then somebody would take would like to talk to you about it. And there's also the joke right now, right? If you're on Wall Street, if you say, the more times you say AI, the more your stock price goes up. And that kind of reflects on your resume too, I think.
Oops, muted. Thank you so much. This is from Thomas. Hi, Addison. How do you think you positioned yourself to be found by Intel's recruiters? What do you think helped you stand out? Maybe you just kind of answered that. Do you have more to add on that?
Yeah, the only other thing I would maybe add to it is I think when Dana and I were talking, she said a lot of people in this on-ramp program, they have experience that's not programming experience, like they come from different backgrounds. That's what mine was too, right? I had a chemistry background, and that's what my focus was at the time. So I think having that, again, and if you can relate it to programming, that makes it even more interesting, right? So a lot of people, when they say chemistry and programming, chemical engineering, there's all sorts of chemical software that you can make. If you can tie the two together, I think that kind of, it's kind of an interesting, like, this person is a focus on, they're a plumber. Why are they applying? And then if you can tie that somehow, I think that'd be kind of neat.
Great. Next one is from Oscar. Using AI is also promoting tech as you work in tech. It's drinking your own Kool-Aid. Okay, that's not a question. This is from Brian. Hello, Addison. I'm a 52-year-old mid-level front-end developer specializing in React. I have about 7 years of experience. I was laid off back in May. How can I stand out in the current market? I have made it through several multi-page job interviews, but I'm not receiving any offers.
That's a tough one because of the tech layoffs, everything is hyper competitive right now. And if you're getting through multi stages of honestly, sometimes when I get to the end part of when we have those multi-stage interviews and we get to like the last phases, sometimes it can even come down to luck. As much as it hurts to say, that's just the reality of it. And you're basically taking a risk no matter what, right? When you're hiring somebody, because you're basing somebody that you're going to work with 40 hours a week for the next X years based off of a few hours of conversation, and who knows how they'll mesh with the team and everything like that. The only thing I could say is possibly do some like mock interviews. I mean, you're very experienced and you're getting to the last stage. But it's like I said, that's a really, really tough one. And I would not be surprised if when you get into these late ones, if it's between you and just a small group or even one other person, and then at the end of the day, they just pick the other person for possibly even the smallest thing, right? Maybe they had one more project than you or anything like that. It's one of those. There's a quote out there, I think it's something like, if you wake up at 5 a.m. to get your exercise in and you're playing in a football game, just remember that your opponent's also getting up at 5 a.m. to get their exercise in. So maybe you need to get up at 4:30, right? It's very, very competitive. And I'll share just some of my personal friends have had very similar situations. One thing I would say is if you're getting to the point, also don't necessarily, you can still apply when you already have a job, right? So you don't have to work at Google in order to still apply at Google. You can get something for the midterm, and that way you kind of bridging your experience in the middle, because there's plenty of smaller companies that are still hiring too.
Thank you so much. Let's see here. Scroll. It's Rena. Ricky says, you have time to make games?
Takes me a long time.
Ian is asking, I also work at Intel New Contractor. Can I contact you and talk about working there?
Yeah.
If you just respond to Ian. Oh, okay. We'll do that.
I think there's 2 Dumkies at the company, so you'll find me pretty easily.
So let's see here. This is again from Reina. As manager, what kinds of questions do you hope your colleagues ask you in their one-on-ones? How can they avoid becoming status updates?
So in I have weekly one-on-ones, so I always meet with all my team members once a week. The biggest questions I want to know right away are, what help do they need from me and what are their blockers, right? Because that is what I'm there to do, is to remove those. If they don't have any blockers and they want to, and their projects are all going well, the next thing I would like to hear about is what kind of ideas do they have to make projects better. One of the things that I did in order to, what I think was really beneficial to my career is, and you want to be a little bit, this is a very, you want to be a little very, very careful with this strategy, but sometimes, somebody would ask for A, B, and C, and that'd be like, I would have an idea for, well, D would be cool. Why don't I add D? And then I would go ahead and add it, and it would be like, this was an awesome feature. We didn't even ask for this. Again, you have to be very, very careful with that. But I think talking with your manager about it then makes it much more safe, because then you can add it as like a stretch goal that was accounted for, rather than how I did it, which is just did it on my own accord. But the nice thing about that is it does show that you're thinking more deeply about the project and how it can be applied to a bigger picture. That's what we're really looking for. Bigger picture stuff is always awesome, because some of the junior people that I hire, that's their biggest gap, right? Is they don't know how things fit into the bigger picture, which is part of my job to help them with too. But if they ask the questions, it would be much, I'd be much more impressed that they're thinking about that. And then the other questions I would like is, if they're really far ahead, how can they help others? So on my team, what we do is every other week we have a meeting where we have one team member talk about what they're doing, so that everybody else on the team kind of knows what they're doing. That way they can offer help and ideas and suggestions and so on. So to summarize, blockers, what blockers do you have? How can I help you? What new ideas do you have or for your projects? And then how do things fit into the bigger picture, and where can you help elsewhere?
Great, thank you. Next question is from Tisby. What were your early side projects?
My early side projects, so I made a small app on Google Play Store. You can go download it, called Tipsy Hamster. It's pretty fun. That was one. I created, again, since I was gaming focused, a lot of my projects were around different elements of gaming. So I created an AI that simulated different types of gaming AI. One was like a swarm, where you were a little dot and you just run around, and like this horde of things would kind of follow you around. Another one I did was a database writer, which was beneficial because it helped me learn databases, and it also helped me think about how MMOs work, those big online games, because they're constantly referencing databases. And then on the chemistry side, as part of my thesis, I was working on an anti-cancer drug that was using a plant-based substance. And with that, I actually kind of programmed this thing called NMR. NMR is a chemistry technique to help identify substances. And it's like a puzzle when you're doing it manually. I'm like, I could probably write a program that helps, me figure this out. So I kind of did something like along those lines too.
Great, thank you. Yeah, your LinkedIn profile picture is you doing chemistry.
Yeah, that picture is like 15 years old now.
Didn't quite expect that when I went looking. This is from Oscar. Anything exciting coming out of Intel, being that there's so much going on with this AI hype?
Yes, I'm trying to think of what I'm allowed to say. I got to be careful. The big thing is right now, if you're paying attention to the news, is NVIDIA is obviously crushing it with their AI stack. And NVIDIA's advantage is that they've created an ecosystem, and this ecosystem has been in the work for like 10, 15 years. So they've been putting in the work to make this happen. But from the very bottom layer of their AI accelerators on their graphics cards, all the way up to their software, it's this comprehensive ecosystem. It's a little like Apple for the AI world. Intel doesn't like that for two reasons. One is because obviously we're getting our butts kicked in that area. And our idea to get around that is we want to, as we call it, democratize AI so that it's not stuck in this NVIDIA ecosystem, which is very difficult to do in tech, because whenever you're first to market in tech, you already have 80% market share. You're way ahead of everybody else. So our efforts to democratize AI is really, really cool. Just from a personal standpoint, I don't necessarily care about the business, but I just think it's better for the world if it's democratized. So there's that. So our focus hardware-wise is to enable our hardware to be on par or better than NVIDIA's as far as our AI accelerators. So that's it from the hardware side. I don't work in client, so I don't know as much. I know there's a big focus on performance per watt. That's a huge thing now because everybody's worried about, how much. They're not worried about how fast you can go. They're more worried about how fast can I go for a reasonable amount of power consumption. With all the environmental sustainability and all that stuff. So I think clients focused a lot on that. From a business perspective, the most interesting thing we're doing is Intel is we're uniquely positioned in the world that we're one of the only, if not the only company that actually fabs our own chips, which means that we design them in-house and then we actually make them ourselves. Most companies kind of contract that work out because it's really expensive to fab chips. So for instance, our new fab plant that's going up in Ohio is something like $40 billion just to get started, right? So what we're doing is, and so just so you know how other companies approach it, TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, they usually just send them there and then TMC makes their chips and then sends them back. So we have that all in-house. And the interesting thing that we're doing as part of our CEO's shift is that we used to be completely in-house, and if you even wanted to make chips, you couldn't, right? Like if NVIDIA asks us to make their chips, we wouldn't do it. But that's changing now. So we're actually going to have a fab that is open to others. So essentially, Intel is going to be competing against itself and the outside world, because if we can get our chips made cheaper at TSMC than we can internally, we'll just send them to TSMC, which means that business unit will lose money, which means people are going to lose jobs and that kind of thing. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's a very interesting shift of focus in how that's going to play out. I could talk about that for like 10 minutes, but that's enough, I think.
Oscar, as a follow-up question, will AMD catch up to NVIDIA and anytime soon when it comes to GPUs?
Probably not, just because, like I said, first to market is so far ahead, and NVIDIA does have their ecosystem in place. It's kind of interesting how fast this happened. Just a year and a half ago, all I was hearing every day was, we're getting our butts kicked by AMD, TSMC, AMD. And now it was like the switch just flipped. And now all I hear is NVIDIA. And it's because obviously a lot thanks to ChatGPT. But yeah, the nice thing about AMD is they have their process nailed down internally really, really well, which is how they're able to have half the number of employees we do and very similar products, which is, I'm embarrassed to say, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Let's see here. And AMD products consume less power, says Oscar. All right, so we are at the end of our questions. Do folks have more questions? Again, this is your opportunity to speak with someone who is in it at Intel. Oh, and just for data's sake, we had a 35% show up rate from our sign up.
Oh, it's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Yeah, it's at the upper range. Folks, any more questions? We've still got about 20 minutes, if there's anything more. Okay, great. Benjamin, thank you. Earlier, you mentioned your entire team is based out of Mexico. What is the driving force behind where Intel decides to hire?
Number one is always going to be cost, especially in this past year, which has been very, very difficult for us. Now, fortunately, Q2 was a better quarter. So hopefully Q3 maintains that and we stay profitable, because the last year was probably definitely the roughest year I've seen at Intel. But yeah, a lot of it is cost. If it's not cost, then it's going to be geographical needs. So one of the biggest challenges my teams face right now is that, so I'm in the central time zone, which Mexico is mostly in as well. So it's kind of nice that our time zones work out like that. However, we provide support for Intel across the globe. So we've got people in India, we've got people in China, we've got people all over, right? And those time zones make it very difficult. So one of the things we're hoping to address right now is hire somebody in a different time zone. That way we can help gap that 24/5 coverage. Just say we try not to work on weekends. In the meantime, how we make up for that is it's actually usually me. So because I have that technical background, I can help work some late nights if I need to, if somebody's having a problem. The other thing that drives hiring is where their current initiatives are, which is far above my grade level. But for instance, Ohio, right? So Ohio's got that new fab plant going in, so there will be a lot of hiring in Ohio. In Mexico, they're trying to drive, one of the reasons that Mexico is so popular right now is they're trying to make that one of the centers for one of the pillars that we're working on. So it all depends on what area you're into. For instance, if you're a thermomechanical engineer, Israel was really, really popular just a couple of years ago. When I first started, about half the team was in Israel. So it's a little bit combination of what you're interested in, what you want to do in. And Intel does have possibilities for you to shift positions, right? So one of the directors that I know, he actually he's living in Europe right now because he needed to help support the fabs that are in Ireland and so on. So yeah, number one is cost though, for sure.
Thank you. Next question, Princess V again. How important are core CS concepts for a software engineer day to day?
In my opinion, they are fundamental. It is the most important thing because everything else is just syntax, right? When I wrote my first app, I had never worked in Java before, but I worked in C#, and concepts are what you need to play with more than anything else. New languages come out all the time, right? New frameworks, new XYZ. So I think that the core is really what matters the most, because what I'll also say is, like, when I'm interviewing people, the two things that I can't help you with is I can't help if you have a bad personality and you won't mesh with the team, right? There's nothing I can do about that. And the other thing is I really can't help build up your fundamentals, right? You have to know how to initialize an int, right? You have to know those basics, but syntax and everything beyond, I can teach you. And I can guarantee that if you're fresh out of college or you're new to working in computer science, your first 3 months of working is going to mean more than your 4 years of education anyway, because there's going to be that's what we get hired to do, is solve problems. We don't get hired to just spit out things that I could do, right?
Next question from Jessica. Is there anything you wish you knew before choosing this career?
Don't do it. I wish I knew. Let me think about this for a second. I wish that I knew how important it was to how do I want to say this? Create new concepts rather than evolving existing ones, I think, is the most important one. So in my old company, I built on existing systems a lot. In the very first system, in the very first company I worked for, I worked on building on establishing systems a lot. And what I wasn't prepared for was a lot of creating things from scratch, right? Creating up my own methodologies and my own sort of algorithms or whatever else you want to call it. And in fact, I do wish I was better in that kind of strategic thinking area, because one thing that will super help accelerate your career at Intel and a lot of tech companies is if you can do things that are like patent worthy. Now, patents are obviously like the top level of algorithm where you create something completely fresh. But if you can do that, the more effectively you can come up with original ideas, you can go so much faster than if you can't. So I do wish I had a little bit more experience about that, and it's something that I kind of struggle with a little bit, but I'll say that's a big one. The other thing is again, that imposter syndrome. I don't know if other people feel this about programming, but programming is a lot of really, really low lows and really, really high highs, right? You feel like you're so stupid when you can't solve X problem, but then when you get it, you're like, I'm the best programmer in the world. This is awesome. So try to not get in your own head like that.
Thank you. Next question from Rena. How far down I'm assuming, corporate career ladder do you think a dev needs to get before thinking of swapping over to manager?
At Intel, at least, again, that's only my experience, you can do it at any level, which is one of the things I really, really like here. I've known principal engineers that will switch between being people management. You don't have to commit to a single path ever. You can switch. Now, it's certainly a little bit easier if you do focus. Like you can go a little bit faster. Like if you want to be a senior principal engineer, you kind of want to focus on your tech side because that's just so high of a level. But you can bounce pretty much every time. Usually that's what I'll tell my employees. Maybe once a year we'll kind of have a career goal view. It's like, do you still want to be on the tech path or do you want to switch to the people management path? Sometimes, we've got PEs that will become a people manager for a year, realize it's not for them, or the opposite, right? They just can't perform. Like they're super, super good technically, but can't cut it as a people manager. That's fine. They just go back to their principal engineer work, which is just as impactful. So I would say that if you get super high, like that principal engineer level, vice president, you're probably not switching too much just because you have to be like honed in, but you can try both and see which one you prefer.
Great. Next question is, do you have any funny or weird stories from interviews?
Yeah, I do have some on this. I don't know if they're super funny or weird, but because to me it's borderline like insulting. So one thing is like when you're going to an interview, and this is all stuff that I've seen, right? Is don't swear and come like you actually want the job, right? Even if it's a virtual interview, right? You don't even have to wear pants, but at least put on a collared shirt, right? They can't, like let's see some effort. Nothing bugs me more than people who show up in like a t-shirt and cursing, and I'm like, come on, we're in a professional environment. Like I'm fine with cursing, like maybe you're on the job and you're having a tough time, that's fine, but in your interview you're supposed to be at your best, right? And I've had people cursing, and I'm like, and they'll just say it casually, but I'm like, this is not the time to be casually cursing. And a big one, this is not funny, this is like, be on time. Like please be on time. If you're even if you're 2 minutes late, if you're 1 minute late, I might forgive you if you have a really good interview, but if you're 2 minutes or more late, I'll interview you just because I have the time on my calendar already, but I'm going through the motions. You're pretty much already eliminated unless you have an extremely good reason as to why you're late. So for this Zoom call, for instance, I don't use Zoom a lot. I logged in 5 minutes early to make sure I was working. It was working. So please show up like you want the position. I will end with a kind of funny-ish story, I guess, is one guy, I really have interest in side projects, right? Show me your passion outside of work. And one guy, I think he was also the guy who wore a t-shirt and he swore. So he had 2 strikes out of the 3. He wasn't late at least, but he was working on like a Tinder swiper to get as many dates as he could. So he had like this automated process to get just as many dates as he could. I was like, appreciate your ingenuity. Not sure if you want to bring that one up in the interview, maybe word it a little bit differently, but yeah, so it's kind of funny. He didn't get the job, FYI.
Great tips. Honestly, I can say that as someone who has interviewed probably thousands of people at this point for Onramp and also for admissions for Dev Bootcamp where I used to work. Those things really matter. Like smile, look at the camera, seem interested. I had a guy who, as the camera came on, was pulling his shirt on because he was just waking up. Be personable. You don't have to be the funniest person in the room, but act like you're at least friendly, even if you're nervous. Okay, coming back over to questions. Okay, this is from Thomas. In your interviewing experience, what do you think is the biggest gap between someone with a traditional CS education versus a coding bootcamp, coming from a bootcamp grad looking to catch up in skill build?
In my experience, again, I'm not going to say this is for everybody, is that the people who go to boot camps are typically sometimes, and I'm not going to say this is true for everybody, right? But a couple of the interviews I've seen is they're doing it because they hear about these, oh, Netflix pays $400,000 a year and I really want to make $400,000 a year. So I want to be a programmer. So I'm going to take this crash course, become a programmer, and be rich and retire in a year, right? Whereas the CS people, and this is not indicative of the person, right? It's just that they have those other side projects that they're interested in, and they actually show that they want to work in CS for some reason, and they're not just in it for the nice paycheck and the benefits and so on. So I think the biggest thing you can do is to show, yeah, I took this crash course, but I have a genuine interest in this. And maybe your interest is purely financial. That's fine too, right? There are people who are in it just for the money, but you better be able to show that you're passionate enough about the work, even if it's driven by money, to do a good job, be innovative, and have a passion for it, and be one of the team members, right? Instead of just going and clocking in 9 to 5 just to take home the paycheck. That's the biggest thing I see. To me, it's, I don't, right, like I said, I went to no-name colleges, right? To me, the education background, I don't look at it as much, but I know there are people that do. So you have to kind of prove yourself a little bit more. And if you have that kind of that passion, you can easily make up for that difference.
Thank you. Next from Jessica, did you ever have a mentor throughout your tech journey? If so, how did you establish that relationship?
Yeah, mentors are, I've had probably 3 or 4 mentors throughout my life, and they basically made me who I am today. I think having a mentor is super important, and they can really help give you a lot of passion and kind of show you, make you better than who you are, right? In fact, the first, well, maybe not the first, but one of my earliest mentors was from my early degree in chemistry, and he's the one who motivated me to go in organic chemistry specifically, because he was so good at it and he had such this personable aura around him, and I ended up being his, he's the one I did the anti-cancer drug with, and I would have done anything to get that project, because I was like, I just want to work with this guy to feed off that energy. Fast forward to now, in fact, my old boss, I would consider my mentor. He's actually my colleague now. I'm at the same level as him, and every time I talk to him, it's just like, I'm all ears and I'm listening to what he has to say. I've met him in person a couple times, which is, fantastic. And we always have a good time. As far as finding that mentor, the advice I would see is, like, if you, it's a little bit of luck, right? You got to get out there and meet people. You can't, they're not just going to fall out of the sky or anything like that. But my advice is, if you see somebody that kind of has that aura and you're like, you know what, if your first impression is like, I would really like to be friends with this person, I think that's a good first start. Like somebody you could go out and have drinks and a meal with, right? Yeah, they happen to be 10 years older than you and far more technically advanced, but if they have that kind of connection with you where it's like, I know I just want to be friends with this person no matter what it takes, I would say pursue that. And then for me, it worked out. I ended up working with my old mentor on the anti-cancer drug. I emailed him actually a few weeks ago to see how things were going. And then my boss, right? To go on a little bit of a tangent story, my first 7 years at Intel, I was a green badge, which is a contract employee, which means I didn't have benefits. My pay was super low. I'll be transparent. When I started, my pay was $15 an hour. I was working at Target at the same time, and I'm pretty sure nowadays you can work at the gas station and make $17 an hour. And this was less than 10 years ago, right? So I was making peanuts for a long, long time. And that's very unusual. So a contractor at Intel is usually 1 to 2 years. And I was an intern for 7 years before I finally became a full blue badge employee, a real boy, right? And 90% of the reason I stayed was because of my mentor. And now that I finally made it, I look back and I was like, it was all worth it. And yeah, like I said, my life would be completely different without him. I would have left a long time ago. So yeah, so don't be creepy. Obviously, it's like don't try to be too abrasive on like making a connection with a mentor. But I think it can start off with just, hey, you want to go get lunch, or can I talk to you about this project I'm working on, or anything like that. But you do have to have that kind of initial spark, I think, kind of like any relationship.
Adding on to that, we talk about this a lot at Onramp, and I speak to a lot of people who are mentors. Another great way to find a mentor, aside from our upcoming mentorship program, which we'll be launching in a few weeks, is joining local meetups. I know that COVID like changed this for a while, but hopefully these things are happening again. Go to meetup.com, look at local coding chapters and get yourself out there. It's definitely not as comfortable as just sending, connection requests, on LinkedIn into the wind. But as Addison said, like a lot of it is just, the vibe. Like, do you connect with someone? Is this someone who wants to spend their time, like essentially volunteering to help you? And so like getting out there and meeting people in person not only allows you to have that connection, like a first date or a relationship, but also shows them that you're investing in this. You're investing in your own education by spending your free time by coming to these things just with the hope of learning.
And if you can offer, sorry, finish.
No, go ahead. That's it.
If you can offer them something too, no matter how minor it is, that makes all the difference, right? Because then like you're not just taking, right? You're giving back. And it can be something super small, right? Like if my chemistry mentor, maybe I was able to take some load off of him, right? Take some menial tasks that he didn't want to do. Hey, can I go help grade these tests for you or something? If you can make that a little bit more give and take, I think you'll have more success.
Beautiful. As with all things, the give and take of life. Let's see here. Any other questions? We're coming to the end of our time. I just wanted to say, Addison, too, I know that obviously the value of the US dollar has changed significantly since you started at Intel, but I appreciate you mentioning that when you started, you didn't start with like $185,000 starting salary, when you knew how to write a few lines of code. I do think that because of social media and because we all have access to everyone else's experiences, and obviously the ones that are the most outsized get a lot of attention, I do think there's a lot of expectation around what those early salaries should be. I do not think anybody in this day and age should take a coding job for $15 an hour unless like you really, really have to, because that does seem to be a little bit low for the time and effort it takes to learn that. But I do think just making sure your ideas about what first year payment might look like for a junior, like it is helpful to be realistic. Things in the tech sector have shifted, hiring standards have shifted, budgets have shifted. And so those kind of like wild offers that we were seeing in 2020 when tech companies were just snapping up everybody with a pulse are coming back down to earth. Not to the point where, again, $15 an hour is standard by any means, but I just appreciate you sharing that as kind of like, hey, sometimes it's not going to be as glamorous at the beginning as it eventually ends up being.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. It was like party's over, right? You're not going to be seeing at least as many of these crazy offers. That being said, I will say, at least, I don't know if this is Intel standard or if it's just me. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this. I think it's probably fine. Don't be, when you get an initial offer, don't be afraid to counter. At least once. The reason I say that is because usually I actually don't have much of a say in how much I can offer initially. But if somebody counters, then I can have a little bit more say. That's just, I don't know if that's how it is industry standard, but it doesn't hurt to ask, right? And who knows, maybe you'll come out better than you expected.
That's fantastic advice. And if you see a range, don't say that you want the bottom of the range. Say you want the top. Bring them down. Let's see here. Last comment from Ricky. Thanks a lot for your advice regarding side projects. I've got an iPhone app and a fitness blog, webcomic coaching service coming. Great. I hope it'll show.
Nice.
Additionally, experience is so important. If I could go back, I would have taken that 50K job instead of gambling for the 120K jobs that I interviewed for the month after.
Yeah, like I said, the experience, right? Especially if you're fresh out of college. I know there's all ages here, but if you're fresh, you're going to learn more in the first few months of work than you'll learn in all of you go to school to learn how to learn, right? That's basically what that piece of paper says is, hey, I know the fundamentals and I know how to learn other stuff. So teach me the other stuff.
Yeah, having that first job in your resume, from what I've seen, like truly is the game changer. Even for our on-ramp apprentices, we have a small percentage that are not offered return shifts when their apprenticeship ends, but every single one of them has been hired shortly thereafter by name brand, ThreadUp or Stitch Fix, Amex, snatched them up right after because they already had that one job. So even if it's that lower offer, it's probably worth taking. All right. Well, we are definitely coming into the end. You've got some thank yous coming in, Addison. A big thank you from me on behalf of Onramp and for everybody here. We really appreciate you taking the